Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to introduce our invited keynote speaker, Mariëlle Feenstra. Mariëlle is one of the founders, the scientific director of 75 Inc. As a pioneer in gender and energy policy research since 2000, she wrote both the first ever master and PhD thesis on gender and energy policy. 75 Inc.'s expertise is acknowledged by the energy industry as informed energy policy making at the national and international level, like the FEM Committee and the JRC. 75 Inc. is also frequently part of the advisors of the Dutch delegation at the COPs and the Committee on the Status of Women in the United Nations. Besides being a research partner and a policy advisor, 75 Inc. has also a growing community of female professionals in the energy transition of currently 800 members. Thank you, Mariëlle.
Yes, let me see, because I don't really like standing here like preaching, and especially not preaching for the converted. So yeah, that works better. So great, thank you so much for the invitation. It's really, really fascinating to see again and again how this field on gender and energy nexus is growing, and how more projects and how more people are getting involved and inspired by all the other work also done in the Global South. And I think I'm very strongly promotes the work you have also done in the Global South, and to have that exchange, and what we will have in the afternoon. So thank you for hosting me. Thank you for hosting this very inspiring place. Good to have that introduction, and it's I really like industrial heritage. It has this raw edge to it, so it's wonderful to be here because Rome is not only gold and glamour and marble, so that's good to know. You already introduced me and 75 Inc. So I can go quickly over that one. I started 75 Inc. After my PhD. And I returned to academia after working for many, many years for the municipalities in the Netherlands on policy advice. And then I realized, no, it's wonderful to do academic work, but as a political scientist, it's also very interesting and fascinating to cross bridges between practice and academia and industry. So I often see myself as well, like one of those fairy women. No, I'm not a fairy man. That make this crossings on the river, and to ensure that all different islands are getting connected. And lovely to do that here as well. I mean, what's in the name? I mean, we already saw the beautiful sculpture of Alexander Calder, yellow and red. I was like, oh, that's great. It's a nice link to our logo, which is, of course, based on SDG 7 and SDG 5, and that needs to be in quality. And I don't need to explain that to you, but it's always a nice starter to have my conversations and lectures focused on SDGs. And people sometimes, I'm still wondering that people don't know the SDGs, but we need to figure out something else because they're almost gone. They're supposed to be done in 2030, and we're definitely not done. So maybe I will be industrial heritage, UN heritage in a couple of years. Because when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, it's, of course, this global commitment, and it's great, but it also addresses national responsibility and local action and cross-sectoral participation. And it definitely, there comes again, we need to cross rivers, we need to cross SDGs, we need to cross different topics and subjects, and also different stakeholders to be involved in this situation. And that's what you will hear throughout my my work and throughout my keynote today is how can we create a very holistic perspective on this gender and energy nexus? Because often I preach gender for the energy sector and energy to the gender sector, and we need to cross those bridges and find a way how we can look at it more systemically. So hence, when we talk about gender and energy nexus in the Sustainable Development Goals, but also at how to address that from a policy perspective, it also address all these other SDGs. They are intersectional, they need to be mutual reinforcing and should not exclude each other. When we talk about 75 Inc., it has three main pillars, and I realize I need to have a small celebration because now we move to 1,400 female professionals now in our network. So we have a lot of voices of those women working in the sector that are facing everyday practices of inclusion, diversity in the sector themselves from different perspectives. So hence, we use those voices also in our advocacy work. And we have the other pillar, is research. And we're hosting master thesis students. Currently, we have 8 master thesis students doing their thesis work with us, working on energy poverty, working on who works in the sector. So if you have students or you know people that are interested in getting some working experiences, they're more than welcome to join us remotely as well. And we use that evidence-based research also in our advocacy. So we see, it's the voices of the people who work in the sector based on evidence-based and data-driven policy advice. So in my keynotes, you will see sometimes observations from who works in the sector, but also based on the research we're doing. Because why are we so focused on this work? Why is it so important? Because now we need to have this inclusive and equitable systems. And this is a dynamic process, but it's also culture. And cultural changes, they don't go over time. You don't wake up the next morning in an equal and inclusive society. It takes a lot of time and a lot of persistence. And I don't think I can't retire yet. There are ways, and we have more work to do than ever, unfortunately, in the current gender backlashing age that we are in. But why do we need to address this in the energy system? And why is inclusive and diversity in the energy system so important? Because what we see is we hit what we call the human limit of the energy transition. Meaning, the adaptation capacity, especially in the Western European world, is reaching its limits. Now, how many people were able to invest, for example, in electric vehicles, in solar panels, have already done it. Those who can't afford it or those who can't need to have additional support. So we need to address this from a policy and different perspectives as well. Acceptation level is the same. The acceptation level for energy crisis and energy prices. You saw the the picture of the gas storage structure. In the Netherlands, 83% of the households use natural gas for the heating and the cooking and the warming the water. The increase of the gas price has a huge impact. However, mixing it with biomethane or etc., people are a bit reluctant. So how do we ensure that that acceptation level for the energy transition is very well addressed to the diversity of households that we have in our society? And then realization. Yes, we need more people. And then, of course, we can invest in infrastructure, we can invest in all kind of new energy engineering and wonderful projects. But we need people to build it. We need people to realize it. And when I talk about people, I think about people in all their forms and shapes and ages and genders. But if you look at the policy documents and if you see who is really recruited and stay in that sector, it's often white male engineers. And we're running out of those white male engineers. So now we need more people, and not only now, but to stay there. And why is that? No, I will address that later as well. So when we look at these dimensions, there are economically, technical, societal dimensions. We can see we need to talk about energy justice and affordability, which is a very strong economic driver, but also a very strong societal driver. We need to talk about inclusive energy solutions, also from a technical perspective. So how do we ensure that the uptake of smart meters is addressing all people? And how do we ensure that electric vehicles and electric mobility is not only for those who can afford it, but can also be affordable for a wider range there? Now, when we talk about societal changes, welcome. Then we talk about diversity in energy roles throughout the system. So how do we research gender and energy? And I can't give you the golden key there, because we need mixed methods and it needs to be holistic. And I'm just giving here some overviews of different methodologies used throughout the years for ensuring that we have to researching a gender just energy transition. And it's not only qualitative, there's more quantitative work. We see more focus also on gaming and modeling. We see more simulations, group-based modeling. I have a student now who's doing group-based modeling, more qualitative, but also complemented with some simulations. And it's exciting to see what kind of insights that is creating to overcome gender biases and gender stereotyping, but also positionality of oneself as a researcher. But why is it in red? We, as 75 Inc. and also as gender researchers, we're focused a lot on participatory action research. Not only talking about the people, but talking with the people, give them voices, focus on transdisciplinary research, and ensure that those voices are heard throughout different methodologies and our research work. When I talk about gender and engendering approaches, there are a lot of different approaches. And you will see in policy and research a lot of different names and terminology used. I mean, you can say in basis, now we're talking about women empowerment and feminism a lot when we talk about engendering approaches. Sometimes it can be seen as a women-only approach. If we look at more from the approaches in the 70s and the 80s, it moves more towards gender mainstreaming during the 90s and the zeros. And now I think we're more in the social inclusion and social justice era. However, we see all these different approaches sometimes popping up in the same policy documents. And when we look at stakeholders' participation and we have stakeholder conversations, there can be people that take a women empowerment approach, and at the same table there can be people more focusing on social inclusion. So hence it's important to understand from which frame are you looking at engendering approaches in the energy sector. The same is a bit with the energy justice tenets. Now, in my work, I often use these three ones, but you have the restorative one, you have the climate justice, the cosmopolitan justice tenet as well. There are several justice tenets to ensure and to include. And why is this energy justice tenet such an important way of analyzing and using in your methodology? Because it can be used as both an evaluative and a normative tool. It can contribute and knows what kind of the questions to be asked when developing a policy, but also how a policy can be evaluated. And these are just a couple of questions. There are more done and developed throughout the academic literature. But it's an invitation. When we look at justice, how can we operationalize it? How can we use it also in evaluation, and not only in the evaluation, but also as a decision-making design tool in policy design. Because when I look at the human role in the energy sector, it's about all the different roles we can play and we have in as energy actors. And it's not only the consumer, but it's also the producer, the decision maker, and all the different roles. There are more than these that are on the slide. But fascinating enough, it's not one of the or the other. So, for example, when I was giving a presentation a couple of weeks ago to energy producers in the Netherlands, I asked now who was working for a DSO, or who was working for an energy supplier, and who said, and so but people were raising hands, and I'm like, great. I said, okay, and who was representing the consumers? And no one was raising their hands. So we're also consumers, and we're also producers, and we might be researchers as well, no? And we might be a member of an energy community in our city, in our neighborhood. So that brings, we are having these different roles in the energy system, and it comes with responsibilities. That comes with not only the difference between diversity and inclusion, is are you able to bring your own identity? Are you able to bring your own needs and your own behavioral consumption patterns into the decision making in the roles you have within the energy system? And when we add there the gender lens, and these are numbers from the Netherlands, we see a very strong gender imbalance. Now, roughly 50% of the energy users are female. But if we look at who is in energy poverty and who is struggling to pay the energy bills and who are in energy vulnerability, 70% of those households are female-headed households. If you look at who works in the sector, well, I'm sorry, but the Netherlands is doing very, very poorly in this perspective. So only 78% in the sector are male workers in the sector. And entrepreneurs, even worse. If you look at who is a founder of an energy company, who is working for an SMEs, these are the 86% are male founders. But the decision makers, now who is really at the managerial roles, who is at the policy decision-making high-level roles, 96% in the Netherlands are male. So that asks a lot of empathy and a lot of knowledge and a lot of awareness of all the diversity and variety of households in an energy system. Because it will take a long time to get their gender balance and to have that equilibrium that was demonstrated by the logo of the project. And why is it instrumental to look at these different gender roles? Because it helps to understand where lies the energy responsibilities, on which kind of buttons can we push if we look at policy interventions, and how can we ensure that there is more balance in this energy system. And then we see now this consumer, producer, and decision-maker role has this very strong gender component if we distinguish between these roles. And there are interventions that can contribute to get a better gender balance in all these different roles. And I will talk you through these different roles for the rest of the keynote. We start with the energy consumer. Well, the diversity of the energy consumer in the European Union, we see that now who is using energy, everyone is using energy, everyone is using electricity, everyone is using different energy mixes in their daily households for the daily chores. But if we look at, for example, who is cooking and doing housework every day, these are numbers from IGE, from the European Institute of Gender Equality from 2022, we see a very strong gender component there. And hence, it's a gendered use of energy, of household energy use, and especially when we look at caregiving responsibilities. Not only caregiving responsibilities for childcare, but also for elderly or other dependent family members. We do see that there is a very strong responsibility in caregiving responsibilities for women. Hence, they cook more for different family members or different members that they are in their extended family. It's the laundry, but it's also sometimes transportation, bringing your parents to the doctor, for example, or picking up your children from daycare. And the high-intensity carers, yes, we see a strong focus there, also on the gendered roles in society. hence, we still can't really talk about the energy consumer in the European Union. It's often not disaggregated. And if we not only disaggregate it between men and women, but also between age and household composition and income, we see a wide variety of energy consumers. And it really brings the perspective of who can afford energy. And of course, now, and I mean, I say of course because energy poverty is now a known term. But when we started working on the gendered access to energy here in the European Union in 2017, there was hardly any notion of energy poverty. It was seen as in Europe everyone can afford the energy, and definitely, well, with the different crises, first the pandemic and now the energy crisis, is demonstrated that we can't. That there is a very strong group in a very huge group in the European Union that can't afford the energy they need. And there are different definitions, but I really focus always on this definition because it's about, now, are you able to adequately heat or cool your home? And that is a bit more subjective definition than can you afford it? No, do you only look at income or energy labels of your house? It's really about the needs and what's the invisible part of energy poverty. Because, and these are a bit unreadable, but why I use the upcoming slides is to let you understand that when we look at the gender component of energy poverty, there is not just one number. Sometimes you really need to look from it from a different perspective. Like, for example, well, if you look at the share of expenditure for energy by gender of reference person, yes, they say, oh yeah, Mariëlle, more women use energy than men. Only not in Denmark and Finland because they have more electric vehicles, the men, and there may be the saunas, I don't know. But those are in all the other countries, female-headed households use more energy than men. Yes, because they probably have more caregiving responsibilities, they have higher household composition. So you also need to look at the household composition. And there you see female-headed households struggle to pay their energy bills on time. Okay, but not women living alone. No, because we know that many women who live alone, single, have what we call female-headed households. If they're struggling to pay their bills, they will find a solution in their social network. They find a way to pay their bill on time, but maybe cut on food expenses or other expenses that they can manage themselves. But they will be very loyal and pay their bill on time. It's different for men living alone. They're more visible in the debt relief numbers, for example. And when we talk about who lives alone, this is not age dependent. This is not differentiated on age, because if we do that on age, this is an unreadable graph. But what it says, it has the date of birth. And how people say, like, I'm cold at home and I'm not paying my bills on time. And there we see that elderly households, this is not gender disaggregated, but elderly households, now of the elderly, they pay their bill on time, but they're living in cold or hot homes. But they will pay the bill on time. So the energy supply said, oh, this is not a group that I'm worried about because they pay the bill on time. But it's the group we should be worried about because they're invisible. And then, and also young people. But they are more visible because they are struggling to pay their bills on time. Now, young people, students, now there are a couple of interesting projects now going on students and their energy poverty, and they're really, really struggling. But they are more visible because they struggle to pay their bills on time. So when looking at to energy poverty or to energy consumption through a gender perspective, we need to have different data points. We need to have not only have the quantitative data, but also the lived experience, to have the stories, to see who is the energy consumer and how can we improve a gender balance in the energy consumption. And why is that? No? Why do we need a better view of who is the energy household? Is how can we create interventions, projects, and an energy system that becomes more inclusive and more just for the different diversity of households? Hence, we need to look at who is working in this sector, how diverse and how inclusive is that, and can they bring their own experiences and that of their neighbors and their family members to the energy sector. And there we see that the diversity of the energy worker is getting a bit better compared to the old days. No, it's not a lot of mining anymore. We see more women entering the sector. We see more diversity also entering in the sector. However, it's still immense worlds in the European Union. And we see that although a lot of interventions throughout the last decades in women in STEM, we see still very flat lines when it comes to the improvement of a gender balance. When we talk about not even an equality, but a gender balance, we talk often about 40% of female participation in the sector. There's still a lot that needs to be done. And not only who works in the sector or who got recruited in the sector, but also about income, the gender income gap, etc. And that is a very strong components as well for the gender balance in that sector. If we look at the Dutch energy sector, there are a couple of projects that we have been doing and that we are still running on who works in the Dutch energy sector. And there we see that there is a very high occupation of especially male engineers or men with a technical background in the sector, and it's very difficult for women to enter the sector. And it has a lot of different reasons. And one of the reasons is that it's what we call, hi, welcome, is that often they report there's not such a thing as focus on what we call the untapped labor potential. Because now when we talk about recruitment, it often focuses on people coming from school, the early careers, the starters. But what about all those men and women that work almost full? I mean, in the Netherlands, the general time that you can retire, the age that you can retire is now 68. So hence, you almost work 50 years. And in those 50 years, you can change and switch sectors, etc. But it needs different interventions. But it's also a huge untapped labor potential. But then you need to understand also how to facilitate this lifelong and flexible career paths. Flexible because you need to ensure that there is an opportunity for the switchers in the sector, but also when for example, when I give lectures in the energy sector, sometimes they demonstrate, we have a breastfeeding room. I said, that's great, but I only need it in my whole career. I have 2 kids for a couple of months, and I'm working 50 years. So how do you ensure that if you can take leave if your mother is getting sick, or one of your best friends needs to go to hospital, or how to ensure this lifelong and flexible career paths? Because we have, when we work such a long time, we have the need for flexible career paths. And there we see, especially in the energy sector, there's a lot of traditional views still going on. And how do we ensure an inclusive work culture? And that goes even beyond fitting clothes. We have, I was at one of those, I was visiting one of the plants. So we need to have those security boots, and they were not in my size, and I have a regular size in the Netherlands, but it all started from the shoe size 40 to 42. It's like, okay, and then I had to get a helmet, and it was all wobbly. I don't think it was very safe, but it was one size doesn't really fit all. We need to have that's one trigger in which we see that's not an inclusive work culture. So when we have interventions, it's about looking at all the different stages. So you have starters, you have stayers, but you need to keep them because the retention numbers are very, very low currently. And also how to facilitate the switchers in the sector. And the leavers, those who leave the sector, are not monitored. We have hardly any data is why are people leaving, especially why are women leaving. So currently I have a master thesis student who is doing interviews with women that left the energy sector. And I'm really curious to see what's popping up there. Because when we talk about biases, and especially gender bias in the workplace culture, this is one of the things that is really, really, really stubborn in the traditional energy sector. And we see that those interventions are still too much focused on fix the women and not fix the system. And we keep repeating over and over again that you should focus on the system and not focus only on those women. And then these cultural biases and the gender biases in the workplace is very often very invisible and difficult to address, and especially difficult to address by the women who works in that sector. Now you need male allies ensure to address these gender biases. And what we often see that then, again, it's not fixing the women, but fixing the individual. So it's really targeting individuals instead of how is the team. Because then they're sending a woman to a leadership training, and then, wow, she comes back completely empowered, and then she's back in the team, and then the team is like, oh, what's going on here? No? And the team is not ready for the person that went to the training. So you have to look at the whole system. Also, we see that many approaches reinforce this gender stereotypes. And it's not only gender, we also see it with cultural and multicultural stereotypes. And also stereotypes when we talk about, for example, age, especially age of those who re-enter, the switchers that go from one sector to the other sector, they are often not in their 20s anymore. So that can also be a stereotype that makes it difficult for retention in the energy sector. And it creates resistance among male colleagues. And unfortunately, what we hear in interviews when we talk about this kind of gender stereotypes in the workplace, we have one big boss on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean that is giving a lot of voice to this gender stereotypes. So it does has an impact of what people say and how people address this kind of exceptions. And there can be things to be done. And really it's about this what we call full organizational ecosystem that needs to be done, and how we can find ways towards a more inclusive and integrated approach. Because when we look at these gender stereotypes, and we often use the word masculine defaults, and there's some great literature, for example, from Viana and Fisher, on this masculine defaults in the technological sector, and especially also with some examples in the energy sector. And we are doing now currently research on this gender stereotypes, and especially the masculine defaults in the energy sector. For example, by not only using interviews and surveys, but also what we call transact walks. We walk through the organization in the workplace and look at what kind of posters are they using, what kind of how are the interactions between colleagues, etc. And there we see that there is a very strong masculine default that is in that sense very dominant in the sector, that is not only fitting for many women entering the sector, but also not fitting for many men. So we also see that this masculine default, and especially what we call in the energy sector the patrimasculinity, is such a strong culture that if you're coming from a different sector, men, women, different ages, you might not also feel like you're fitting in. So in the Netherlands, the recruitment of diversity, men, women coming from different sectors, different ages, is increasing. But of the newly recruited people in the energy sector, 60% leave within 2 years. So how do we get the retention? Therefore, culture is really, really, really important. And there are different examples of masculine defaults in practice. Now, what we see is, and especially in vacancies, for example, we see you need to have affinity with technology, or you need to, technology is often seen as a natural talent. I never saw in vacancies in health that you need to have a natural talent to deal with people. But with technology and STEM, it's often this idea that you are born with some technological skills or interest. And especially, this is very strongly cultural, because we do see in different European Union states that this is not always the same culture. But in the Netherlands, where we have a very strong male breadwinner culture, technology is seen as a male-dominant field. So, and it has had also trickles down to different employment practices. So this very strong full-time on-site culture that limits also the work-life balance that is important for many different groups of people, and especially women. These masculine and feminine defaults in the energy sector comes also back to what we call the competitive versus the cooperative culture. In some literature, it's sometimes called the masculine and feminine leadership styles. I rather talk a bit more about competitive versus cooperative culture. And there we see a shift in the energy sector, where the renewables are focusing a bit more on this cooperative culture. And especially new startups, new energy communities, they need to work with different stakeholders together. They need to work with different disciplines together. So it has a different, they are having a different culture. Hence, we see more diverse recruitment as well. So, for example, they hire also more diverse people with different skills, like not only STEM, but also lawyers or policy advisors or socialists, behavioral scientists. It comes with this more cooperative culture and understanding that they are part in the energy system and they have to deal with different stakeholders as well. But it also comes with a variety of roles in the energy sector. So they're not only focusing on the more infrastructure projects, but are way more communicative and more, like for example, if you look at the energy communities, that they might build something themselves, but they are more service-oriented in that way. So they need to focus more on this cooperative culture. How am I with time? Because I don't have... Okay, good. Thanks. Because I was like, I can't see how I'm doing with time. So that brings us almost also at the last role, namely the energy decision making. And hence, what I was saying is about this, what happens in the living room, can you bring that to the boardroom? And can you bring that in the different roles? So it's about this balance. How are the voices heard from those in the households, the end users, in the boardrooms, in the decision making? And we do see that there is a growth of female senior managers, and especially in renewables. One of the reasons might be quota. No, because we see, and especially in the European Union, that at the boardroom level there needs to be a certain level of female professionals. But there we have the leaking pipeline, because at the boardroom you might have more women, often to be, unfortunately, in HR or marketing or communication, but hence there are more women in boardrooms, but not at the other managerial positions. And why is that important? Because it's a difference between this fixed and this growth mindset. And especially when we talk about a growth mindset, that is needed in this decision making, and especially for an inclusive society and especially for an inclusive organization. We need to move from this fixed mindset to this growth mindset. And when we have done interviews with senior managers in the energy sector, we unfortunately saw a very strong preference for this fixed mindset when we talk about human skills. They're very growth oriented when they talk about business orientation and economics and growth, profits, but not when they talk about their human skills, the capacities and the capabilities of their teams. Another role, of course, can be the entrepreneurs, and there, what was also demonstrated in several reports that you have been published on your website from gEneSys, we do see more women getting involved in startups in the energy sector. However, these are numbers from the Netherlands. We still see that only 40% do invest of the women investors are women. And how can we ensure that there are more female founders? It's, again, stimulating diversity in all different roles, because we see many energy startups coming up from R&D and from research and development from the universities. But hence, if we have not many women in research and development, that can maybe not move towards female founders in the sector as well. We see also that those that start an energy company based on very strongly R&D focused energy companies are coming from universities, hence are in an age group that might also have caregiving responsibilities. That is often seen as not sufficient supported in entrepreneurship, and the funding is really a key element. We see that, for example, if there's grants and subsidies and funding, there's a lot of that for startups. However, we see that women are more reluctant, female founders are more reluctant to apply for this kind of funding than male founders. So to wrap up, data. This is an old slide from my master thesis in 2002. A bit revived, but I think we can still use it. Because there is hardly any gender disaggregated data, and we collect them, but we often don't report it. So I still see in so many research and policy documents the household, the energy consumer, the energy worker, but please dissect it and make it visible how the diversity is included in the data. And then as a conclusion, yes, disaggregate the energy actor. No, we don't. We should not talk about all this, these huge groups without understanding the diversity behind that in age, in gender, in household composition. Also the fluidity of household, don't underestimate the fluidity of households, especially in Europe. All these co-parenting constructions and people who are having caregiving responsibilities outside their own family. Policy is a strong driver, as we see with quota, as we see with funding, as we see with gender mainstreaming policy. It has a very strong impact. Also, the gender backlashing that we see currently. And context, because my talk brings a lot of examples from the Netherlands, which is a Western European country. If I can bring numbers from, for example, the Baltic States, we see a completely different perspective. We see more women involved in STEM. And if we take examples from the Global South or from Sub-Saharan Africa, we also see different numbers. So ensure that you position yourself in the context that you are comfortable talking about. Thank you, and looking forward to many panel discussions and your questions. Do you want to have that?
Yes, but if there are any questions, we can just take it, or... Yes.
Thank you very much. It was a great talk and a huge pleasure to listen it. And I would like to ask about one dimension that I couldn't find in the presentation, about the women as the citizen, as the actors in energy system. So because there was consumers and producers, prosumers, etc., policymakers, but I wonder how, or maybe you have data, or maybe this data are not collected, but what is with the women who are the local leader, or how often they are engaged in some initiatives related to energy, like protest movements or the new initiative, and how it looks like this kind of local leadership, the bottom-up initiatives. Thank you.
So.
It's on. Yes, thank you for that question. And we have one of the experts of energy citizenships in the room. So that's yes. And there's growing data. Again, sometimes very local. But if I see, for example, in what we call the civil society movement. There is way more attention to just energy transitions than a couple of years ago. And that is, for example, like 5 years ago, I was part of the delegation of the COP in the Netherlands. And I added the gender components. And some civil society organizations said, really? And then there were some gender organizations and feminist organizations that said, well, we're still struggling for equal rights and reproductive rights and sexual rights. We don't have time to include also climate and energy. Now, last month, International Women's Month, I was really busy in the Netherlands to talk for different women's organizations and gender organizations, feminist organizations about the just transitions. So hence, it's really, really improved and increased, unfortunately, because of the pandemic and the oil and energy crisis and the Ukraine war, and we see every day, they see every day struggles of households that can't afford the energy bills, and also at the local level. So we see more local politicians, female politicians, involved in energy in energy topics. But again, it's a bit the same what happens in the work fields. It's often framed in a very technological way. And we do see, for example, there's a research done by Karina Stendal in Norway on the involvement of women in energy communities and local energy initiatives. And there it's they report sometimes not feeling knowledgeable enough or technological enough, or there are these meetings that are in the family rush hours at 7 o'clock in the evening, for example, when their child care given responsibilities. So hence we need to have a different way of talking about energy, and to move ahead from this very technological driven field towards what does it mean for everyday persons. And so this reframing is really important, to have more women involved as energy citizens in the energy field. And that is, again, very strongly contextual, because I have done work in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Uganda, but also in Burkina Faso, also in Niger. And there you see way more women's corporations involved in clean cooking, and they are really considered as the energy household managers. And so that's very strongly contextual. Also, in one of the early energy transitions in the 50s, for example, in France, you had the Fée de Énergie, and there were housewives that went from door to door to sell electricity contracts. They were seen as the energy decision makers in the households. So but somewhere in this energy transition, we're kind of lost that frame of who is using energy, how is energy be communicated, etc. So if there are energy communicators in the room, I really inspire you and invite you to be involved in how are we communicating about this energy transition. Maybe a bit diluting my answer to your question. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this way. A very nice presentation, very interesting. I'm Rocío Díaz from Imperial College. I'm also a partner. Okay, that's better. A partner in the project. And I wanted to ask you if within your organization you see the...
I just move away a bit, sometimes that helps.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's even better without the microphone.
Maybe it's because you're standing in the speaker. You just go on.
Yeah. That is even worse.
Let's change this. Maybe is this one? Yeah, it's this one.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so I wonder if you work looking at some of the synergies by type of energy, because, for example, Europe, we focus too much. There is no a big difference between energy access and electricity, and that is a very common issue. While my focus is mostly on bioenergy, and I work a lot in Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America, and there you can actually see synergies even here in Europe, because there are still many rural areas who, of course, they do not depend of bioenergy for cooking, but they still do cook a lot with fuel wood. France, Spain, even certain rural areas here in Italy, and that is a very big difference. And one of the things that we have found also through our research is big difference in terms of land property. Europe has around 70% of land property. It's men. And I think it was something around that, no? And that also makes a big difference in terms of how you can also have access to these type of resources for energy generation, that you can see really clearly the difference between rural and urban areas in Europe, but also the similarities with the Global South. Yes.
Okay. I'll get yours. Yeah. Then I'm better ensured that this one is not zooming. Yes, and thank you so much for that question, because that is the reason. So I did my master thesis on gender and energy policy in Uganda and South Africa in 2002, revealing my age here. Then I left academia, and then I returned in 2017 for my PhD, and my idea was to go back to Uganda and South Africa to see what happened with this gendered approach in their energy policy. And then we got invited, me and Joy Clancy, my supervisor, to work on this gender and energy access in Europe. And we haven't, I worked as a European affairs advisor, but not on electricity or energy. And we used the coping strategies and our methodologies and our literature from the Global South to apply that in Europe. And there we were, in that sense, shocked to see how much of the coping strategies of using fire firewood, etc., was still very prevalent especially in the rural areas in not only the Mediterranean but also the Eastern Europe, the Baltic states, etc. And we started to work with different NGOs and to monitor it, because what we have seen during the pandemic, and especially after the Ukraine war, the increase of firewood use has been really structural, and because that seems to be often more affordable. And there are even projects, for example, in Bulgaria and Romania, where the municipalities are distributing free firewood to those households that cannot afford the energy access. However, many of that firewood is scrap wood, is polluted, we're talking about indoor air pollution is bad. Every 11 seconds, someone dies globally on the impact of indoor air pollution. And that's also European in Europe. So this energy mix, and I think that's really, especially now again, when we have a current oil crisis and a gas crisis, it's important to look at this energy mix. And I agree, electricity is often is the main frame in many European policies as well, where the gas infrastructure, but also clean cooking fuels are really important. So I think it's important to continue also to bring these stories, and also the use of firewood and biomass and accessibility, because especially in the rural areas, we know that many, in for example, the rural areas in Central Eastern Europe there are many elderly women living alone because the men left, or the children left, and they are struggling to have to get the firewood or to have affordable energy. So we see coping strategies of only heating one room, not sleeping in the kitchen, etc., with all health issues when we're talking about firewood production as well. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we need to move on because we have the other panel. Thank you, Mariëlle. That was...